There's something kind of great about my interviewing you too, Jocelyn. Jocelyn and I first met at Sundance in Utah probably more than 20 years ago. Yes. And I was there as a literary advisor, he was there as a literary advisor, and as a dramaturg. And I just kind of started following him around because I thought, okay, he's probably the smartest person in the room. So I can learn from him. I've always been very smart that way. I follow smart people. And so we became really fast friends. And several years later, you started coming here to Arena, and then pretty soon you were our senior dramaturg. I'm going to ask him what a dramaturg is, because the last 10 minutes you guys can ask whatever question you want. And that is probably the question that dramaturgs hate to get more than anything in the world.
Oh, actually, I really love that question.
Okay, then go for it.
It's one of my favorite questions. Because everyone assumes when you use the word dramaturgy or dramaturg, there's an assumption that everyone knows what it means. Do you know what dramaturgy is?
We have ideas because we read the Arena program.
Well, the simplest definition is always the best definition, I think, generally. And for me, the dramaturgy is the art of writing or producing a play. And that covers all possibilities in terms of dramaturgy. And then dramaturgy is broken down into kind of three areas, or two areas particularly. The first is production dramaturgy. So that's mostly about research of existing canonical plays, where the dramaturg prepares what is called a production book, which is then given to the cast and to the director and to the design team, and it helps with an interpretation of that particular production. And then there's new play dramaturgy, which is the area that I mostly work in, which is developing new plays. And that is a process that is fascinating, changeable, and unpredictable, and wonderful. And some dramaturgs find it completely terrifying because it's like the Wild West. In one way, you're making up the rules as you go along. On another level, it seems quite simple. And then there's a kind of dramaturgy that I practice, which is I don't believe in dramaturgs. I think they're like unicorns. I do think, however, that dramaturgy is a function and can be a role that can be assigned to anybody in a rehearsal room. That's a shocking idea because there's a whole school of training in dramaturgy, and there are young dramaturgs coming out of college, but fundamentally you can assign the role of a dramaturg to anybody in the room, and then you give them a series of things that they should do when they're in that room with you. But the reason I say this is because fundamentally I'm not interested in new plays, even though I work in new plays. I'm only interested in the people making the new plays. So I'm only interested in the playwrights. And so for me, the conversation is using the play as a site to explore their own dramaturgy. And in that case, what I mean by dramaturgy are the choices that they make as artists. Why this word? Why that character? Why this story now? Why not this other story? And so really what you're saying, these are the things that are happening inside your play. Do you want these things to happen inside your play? And they go, I didn't know that was happening inside my play. And then they're given choices. So my job, and it's an ethical job as much as it is an artistic endeavor, which is to restore to playwrights the sense of authority over their own creative practice in a theater system that continually, in some senses, undermines that, and then to restore their own sense of autonomy as playwrights, their sense of independence. And so ultimately, and this has been very true of my time at Arena, which is I start a conversation with Ken Lin on one play, and then I continue that conversation with Ken Lin on another play. Just to use Exclusion as an example. Or that if I'm working with actors, I get to continue the conversation in terms of workshops or even in terms of productions with that actor all the way through. We just happen to be working on a play. And so that changes the nature of the relationship that I have as a dramaturg with the artist, but it also fundamentally alters the relationship that the artist has with his or her work, or their work as the case may be. So one of the things that I say to playwrights, which drive them crazy, which is on their opening night or their last preview, and I turn to them and say, so this is just the first iteration. And they go, but it's done! It's really not done. It's done when you're dead. You know, in other words, that you have the choice to continue working on it again and again and again. And your relationship with that play changes as you as a playwright get older and change with your own life experiences. It changes the relationship. And also your play changes as you get older. That the feelings that it is in many ways a memory box for you of that time. And so whether you wish to preserve that or whether you wish to change it. But this idea that a play is somehow fixed seems to me to be deeply odd. I was going to say another word, but odd is good. In terms of that theater is the most ephemeral of arts. So that when you're sitting watching a theater performance, whatever it is already degrading and decaying right in front of your eyes. And it degrades and decays from second to second to second. And so this idea that somehow plays are different from performances or from scenography, that they are not degrading, is ludicrous. They are changing all of the time. And so they're as unstable. And so therefore you should be attentive to that. And so this conversation about dramaturgy becomes an artistic one as much as an ethical one. I hope that answers the question, what is dramaturgy?
I want all of you to repeat that back to me. Okay, so I'm going to just be handing you things out of left field because I think that's the most fun with Jocelyn. Okay, so here we are with somebody who has spent a lot of his life, most of his life, as a writer, as a critic, working with writers. Okay, and here we are in the middle of one of the scariest and most explosive moments that has to do with artificial intelligence. And where are we in terms of artificial intelligence and what you see in 5 years will happen to writers in terms of plays? I've read a couple of pieces. Steve Cossum, is out there really having AI write.
I had a conversation with him about a couple of days ago. Yeah.
And I've seen a number of them, and they're not unlike some of the lower level plays that come into arena already. So where are we going? What kind of a bomb is this? Janusz, you mentioned it as a bomb. I mentioned it as it will be as explosive as the internet, with things that are wonderful and things that are terrible about it. But what's going to happen with the writer?
I met Steve Cossum. He's the director of the Civilians of the company in New York, and he told me that he started working with ChatGPT, and he started creating a character called Aging Homosexual. And so he has this relationship with Aging Homosexual, and he gives it certain questions and answers. And he's carved this character using the ChatGPT. And so we're talking about a performance that he could do with that. And I told him that my little company in Ireland, we are doing a project for 2 actors, which the entire text is generated by ChatGPT, because I'm fascinated by ChatGPT. And so my view is I'm not afraid of it. Do I think it'll displace playwrights? I think there will be a displacement for a short period of time. I think that in many ways, ChatGPT will either turn into the Terminator 4.0 and we'll all be dead within a year, or that won't happen at all. The ChatGPT texts, and they speak about hallucinations at the moment, and they speak about a certain kind of sentience, but the actual texts produced by ChatGPT are only as good as the prompts that you give it. So that's thing one to know. And then thing two is that the text that's generated is actually poor text as opposed to rich text. So accidentally it might fall upon an interesting kind of poetic formulation. But the thing about ChatGPT texts is that it needs someone to shape them and to craft them. And that is where the art comes in. And you can't ask another ChatGPT, FredGPT, to do something with ChatGPT's text because it'll end up being the same thing. So the place for the artists is in this area around how do you craft generated text. And how long that will last, I don't know. But do I think it will displace playwrights? It will certainly discomfort them. I think it subverts the hierarchies around the playwrights. And so I come from a country, Ireland, I live in Ireland, where we essentially live with 19th century artists in the 21st century. And when I say 19th century artists, I mean playwrights. American playwrights in their heart of hearts are also 19th century artists because universities encourage them to think of themselves as 19th century artists. What do I mean by a 19th century artist? I mean an artist who is sitting there and suddenly they're inhabited by the spirits or the gods. And then the art comes into their head and they present it, and then they speak like a priest and they say, this is the way it is. And then everyone else is involved in the interpretation of that text. The director is at the top of that, and then the actors and the designers and so on and so forth. But we place the playwright at the pinnacle of that, because without playwrights, theatre cannot exist. That's what we tell them, that's what we tell ourselves. It's completely not true, but it's a good lie. And so in Ireland, the reason I'm doing the ChatGPT is I'm being deliberately controversial, because I'm also asking, the thing about ChatGPT is to say we need to engage with technologies. We need to stop thinking like 19th century artists. We need to start looking at gaming. We need to start looking at AI. We need to start looking at hypertext, or what used to be known as hypertext. We need to start looking at these narratives and these languages and incorporating them into theatre. The fact that we're still thinking like 19th century artists in many ways, but no, technology's bad. I mean, technology has always spurred forward. So television writing is enjoying one of its best periods of writing, because a lot of theatre artists, because theatre doesn't work in terms of sustainable income or opportunities, are moving into television. So it's having an impact in television writing. And so you can see that theatre writers are having an impact on the structuring of stories. And so ChatGPT is a similar kind of virus. And if you think about it, what it does is it transforms our thinking about story. It transforms our thinking about authorship, which I think is really important. But the reason why, which I think is behind your question, which is that the WGA, as you know, the WGA is currently on strike. I'm a member of the WGA.
That's what I wanted to ask you about.
So I'm on strike. But one of the things the producers are saying, oh, the reason they're going on strike is they're threatened by the ChatGPT. It's actually not true. They sent out a notice 6 weeks ago saying, you know, please be aware of the implications around authorship, the implications around royalties, the implications about who gets to own this text. So who owns, if I give a series of prompts and the ChatGPT creates a text, is that my text? Is that ChatGPT's text? And if somebody else, if you do a prompt, and then that text is created, and then you and I come together and we combine those, then we're both in a royalty pool, sure. And so this problem about ChatGPT happened, and Janos can speak to this as well as anyone else in this room, and so can other people, which is that it was the problem of devised work. So devised work is made by actors. And so they're given prompts, and they make scenes, and then somebody in the room writes it down, and they say, that's mine. And they go, but the actors made this. Surely the actors are entitled to a royalty. No. I am the playwright. I wrote it down. Yes, they may have created situations, they may have created the characters, but it's mine. And they will get the royalties. And so ChatGPT is in many ways creating similar questions about ownership, about authorship, and about authority within the room. So I actually think it's something that we should not embrace necessarily, but certainly not be afraid of until we understand what it is. And at the moment, nobody understands what it is, least of all the creators of ChatGPT, because the implications in terms of truth is huge, in terms of veracity is huge, in terms of trust is big. And so there is a huge ethical question, which, you know, Silicon Valley is notoriously shy of engaging with, because for them it's not about the common good, it's just about profit. And I don't say that as a smug-sounding socialist. but that is the driver.
Great. So we're gonna, okay, this is great. This is an interesting part of this discussion. Now let's just dive in a little deeper into what is going on with this big writer's strike. Are you all aware of this?
Yes.
Big writer's strike. So it's been a long time since television writers, film writers have actually had a writer's strike. It's been like 12 years, 15 years, okay. So it's been a long time. Why are they striking? We talked about AI. Why else are they striking? Because Jocelyn also is in a writer's room for Pussy Doll, right? Which is Katori Hall. You remember when she was a resident writer here
Yes.
at Arena Stage?
Yes.
And she has a television show that's been going on now for 3 seasons, 4 seasons?
We're now in the third season.
Okay, 3rd season, which is great. So I'm going to want you to piggyback on this with giving people a picture of what a writer's room is, because you hear that term all the time, right? And also, why are you guys striking? What, you don't get paid enough? You don't have enough? What is it? You don't, your work isn't? What's going on?
It's a couple of things all happening at the same time. They're not striking over a chat GPT. Let me just underline that. So that's not why they're striking. They're striking about, it's an existential crisis for many writers, which is that the streamers have broken the model. So the model was very simple. If you wrote for network television, you went in and you sat in a writer's room and you wrote together episodes. If your name appeared on the episode, you would get a fee for that. You would get a weekly salary. So think about your TV writers as temps. So they only ever work for 20 weeks a year or 10 weeks a year. And so what they're trying to do is get 2 rooms, and the rooms need to be 20 weeks a year. That's 40 weeks of salary. And then, so 20 years ago, that was more or less possible. 30 years ago, that was very possible. It's become increasingly less possible. So you hoped to write your essay, get your name, or write your episode, I'm so sorry, get your name on it. If you get your name on it, you get a royalty or a residual. And so those residuals, if you're working in network television, can be anywhere between $20,000 and $50,000 a year, depending on the number of eyeballs that see it and the number of repetitions on whatever channel. That's a network. In a streamer, they buy out all of those residual rights. So you could write your episode, your name could be up there, you may not have been getting WGA rates, or you could have been, but you will not get the residuals. And the residuals make a huge difference, particularly as you get older and there's more repetition and so forth. So there are people who, Henry Winter is still living on the Fonz 40 years later as an actor. Do you know what I mean? So residuals have a very huge impact. Then you have, so streamers have no residuals. And then you have cable television, and they have less residuals. And so that's the problem. So that there are different levels of residual. And so therefore writers need access to a kind of an equity or a parity of payment. The second thing is that there are so many shows happening that how do you keep up with them? So it's hard to try and get access to the rooms. So what is happening is they have small rooms, what they call mini rooms, which are 10 weeks long. So what you do is you hire young staff writers, and I started as a staff writer in P-Valley. So staff writers, the expectation is that you sit there and that you can generate material and that you get paid a minimum of $4,000 a week. And you do that for 10 weeks. And then there are so-called higher echelon, which is producer, supervising producer, executive producer, above them. And so you generate a general map of, in 10 weeks of a series, and then you map out what the episodes could be. And then that room closes. And so all of those mostly younger writers don't get a chance to go into the bigger room. Only the people with seniority go into the bigger room. So you've just killed yourself working out this story, and then you're cut off at the knees. That seems terribly unfair. And then what's happening is, the second thing is that a staff writer doesn't have naming rights and royalty rights. So as a staff writer, you can write a scene, you can write an entire episode, and I as a showrunner can come along and change 5 words, more or less, and change a couple of things, and then I can take the writing credit for that and the royalty, or the residual, whatever that is, and the staff writer gets nothing. So there are built-in inequities. And these inequities have been fought over for years. And so it's been about trying to change the payment levels, trying to make it a much more equitable creative process. So I'm just pointing out to those two things. So this is an existential battle. It'll be interesting to see if the producers understand how much of an existential battle this really is. Because people were expecting a certain kind of, they use the phrase middle-class life, but a certain kind of life where you could raise a family, you could get a mortgage, and there would be a certain kind of stability within that. And an entire generation of writers in their 20s and 30s who are also carrying a vast amount of college debt don't have that possibility anymore, and now they're fighting for it. And there's a whole tranche of upper echelon people who've been there for years, and it affects and impacts them less because there's a kind of security once you reach a certain level. But it's for those younger writers who are leading the charge. And so I think it's really important that this happens. I think it's very necessary that this happens. I think the conversation needs to get bigger because there are built-in inequities. So that's generally the WGA, and I'm not the best person to ask. That is my understanding of it. But in terms of the writer's room, you're asking in terms of the dynamic of that. So the writer's room is essentially, it's either a mixture of, what's that great movie? Hunger Games, or that great book, as the case would be, or a writing camp. It's a mixture of both. And so what happens is that a showrunner will have an idea, and sometimes will have a story in her head, and she uses the writers to test that idea, and then to generate material around it. So I first met Katori Hall when she was a resident writer, and we hit it off, and I was one of the few, I think I'm one of the few people in the country who actually saw the original Pussy Valley, which is now P Valley, for obvious reasons. And it's on Stars, and I urge you to watch it because it's brilliant. But so Katori's play was set in the strip club in Mississippi. And so I actually saw the production of Mixed Blood. And I texted and said, oh my God, this is amazing. What's happening with the audience is even more amazing. And blah, blah, blah. And then, so she and I kept talking about it, and then years later she wrote a pilot and asked me for notes, and then she invited me in to be a staff writer. So I started at the bottom of the pecking order. And staff writers, you're supposed to sit there and observe and not do very much, and occasionally you write something. And then, but my relationship with Katori is that Katori and I have known each other for years, talk back and forth all the time, and this was deeply confusing to a deeply entrenched system, so that you can't do that. And everyone uses the word pitch, which I don't understand. But essentially what you say is, I pitch an idea. So I pitch an idea that she walks down the street and she turns left. And then someone else says, I pitch an idea, she walks down the street, turns left, and goes up some stairs. I pitch, and so it's pitch, pitch, pitch. What you're actually generating is a competition. Because it's about the ownership of that idea, rather than what is the best way to do storytelling, or what is the best way, what's the best for the story. So Katori is the most unusual showrunner in the world, is that whoever is in the room can speak. So that means that the assistants, who never get to say anything, are constantly being asked what their opinion is. And they pitch ideas. So this is this amazingly collaborative process. And Katori is just listening, listening, listening. And when she goes, mm-hmm, you're like, oh, it's not working. And then when she goes, I see that, then, oh, she sees that. And so, but that is unusual. But generally what happens is that writers' rooms can become sites of great trauma and sites of great creativity. And so the navigation of that is that it's built in right for exploitation, hence the 10-week rooms, which are challenging and problematical. But also there are kind of ethical behaviors that are inappropriate, exploitative. So I think that this behind the WGA, even though these are not the things but that they're speaking explicitly about, but there is an attempt to change certain cultures. And the biggest cultural change that they're trying to say is that the writer is actually important. Because streamers genuinely believe you can take one writer out and plug in another writer and the same thing will happen. And so it's like a cog. And so they're coming from a tech background, and you just throw cogs at the system. And the challenge is, well, writers aren't cogs. So how do you create a system that recognizes that?
You know, it's so interesting because in the theater, the writer is primary, right? That's the focus we have in the theater. In film, it's the director. So it's how does the director work with the pieces that have been written, that they actually are moving into the pieces that they want to write. So it's a very, very different relationship within these two art forms. And also, with a writer's room, it really is about a group collaboration. Whereas in the theater, it generally is a solo act, with other people collaborating with that writer, but a solo act. So it's actually really different art forms. So it's interesting to me because in the theater, the union, the writers' union, is the most powerful in this country. It's more powerful than any other union that we have. And I wonder if what's happened is because more theater writers have gone into film, if they're now infusing that with the rights of the writer. Because that changes the whole equation, right? That changes the whole equation. And, you know, I think a lot of people are saying, oh my God, what's going to happen to my favorite television show? How long are they going to stay out there in terms of striking? And they have such a backlog of work, they could stay out of work for months, right? And still.
Yeah, the streamers have a lot of content. Do you know what I mean? They've just, I mean, Netflix has just signed a deal with UK producers for $1.5 billion. Korea, so they have a lot of content, a lot of it's international content. So the ones that will suffer most immediately are the networks. So the hope, I think, I can speak to strategy, but the networks on the live television shows, your late shows, et cetera, they're the ones where it's most visible that this is now suffering because nobody's writing the content. And we've seen this episode again and again and again from 50 years ago. So that's when it becomes an issue. But it's interesting that, I mean, I do think that I used to be livery manager of the Abbey Theatre. And the Abbey Theatre, for those of you who don't know what that is the National Theatre of Ireland. And so when I went in, I would ask my readers who read these plays I noticed that we weren't getting any playwrights, because they're all in Ireland. And I said, so what are you reading when you're reading? And they said, well, we're looking for plays that are national themes. And they're only good enough for the Abbey Theatre. And I said, have you found it? No. And I said, well, maybe we should change the value. Maybe we should change the criteria to written for the stage. And suddenly hundreds of scripts were coming in my direction. And so then I started all these programs, some of which I did here as well, about giving resources of the theater to writers to write plays or to develop their practice in some way, or to advance their practice in some way. But the question always was about the centrality of the writer. And I do think I take issue with the idea of the centrality of the writer to the theater, simply because I think we need to start challenging and interrogating that. And I do think that, you know, the player, and this is not me beating up playwrights, but it is to say we need to start questioning some of those authorities very carefully. Because the problem about the playwrights, or the challenge for the playwrights, is that the theater has in some ways coddled them in a terrible way, which is that the expectation is you come for the first week rehearsals, and then you don't be around until previews, or else for the designer run. And so there's a sense in which playwrights are both inside and outside of the house simultaneously. And so that creates tensions. And also it's a very lonely pursuit, writing a play. And then suddenly you are getting a whole bunch of questions being thrown at you by designers and directors and actors asking, so what happened when they were a child? Or what color is the room? Or whatever the question is. And so there needs to be a looking at the formation of playwrights, i.e. how they're learning, what they're learning in universities. And so one of the things that's happening here is that there's this broken pole playwrights arena. And for the last 3 years, we've been working with, or I've been working with students from Howard and from Georgetown. Because I'm trying to figure out this problem, which is how do you make 21st century playwrights? And how do you give them the confidence and the tools to be in a room where they can assert their authority and yet also be open to changes and open to responding to what's happening in the room. And that it's not about them as human beings, but actually about the object that we're all looking at, which is a play or as a production. And so it's really about challenging certain kinds of formations, because I do think that relationship needs to shift. And so the WGA also is asking a question of what is the value of a screenwriter? What is the value of a TV writer? How do we define that? The ChatGPT question is also asking what is a writer and how do we value them within the culture? How do we support them within the culture?
Right. And Jocelyn, I want to take another left turn and begin talking about the power plays, because a lot of your time at Arena has been spent on the power plays. So this is our 25 plays from 1770 through the 2010s that we have commissioned 24 out of the 25 playwrights now. Yay, yay, yay. Bravo, brava. Yeah, Teresa Sapien is in the back too, and she's our associate artistic director. We've been pushing to get them all done, which has been very, very exciting. But so I want to ask the question, which of the plays has most surprised you? And which of the plays is one of the ones that you think, oh, it has further to go, but at a certain point it will get there?
I think that's true of all of them. And that's what I was saying earlier on, is I don't think plays are done. I think that there is more to be discovered in them. So I think they're all yet to be fully formed, and they are more progressed. I mean, again, all of the plays have surprised me in terms of the journeys, but really what's most interesting to me about all of them are the playwrights. And so I've been really fascinated by their courage and their ambition and their originality and the degree to which they take something which is to take a moment in history and to have a point of view about it and to put it out there and be at risk with that. And it's much different than writing a work that is untethered from history, that what comes from your imagination, that may be inspired by an actual moment, historical or contemporary, but that the conversation is slightly looser, where it's actually given a framework, which is, let's look at this decade. Some of that can be intimidating, because the expectation is that you as the playwright will become a historian. They're not historians. And so there's this anxiety about, oh my God, I have to be historically accurate. And really you don't. You just have to have a point of view about what actually happened and engage with that. And if we're going to futz with some of the dates of the events, we may futz in a beautiful way, but it's still a dramatic work. And so it's really to say, stop being historians, but actually be artists. So I'm delighted in all of them. I've been surprised in terms of how deep they have dug into certain things and not so much certain things. I'm thinking of Lee Cataluna, for example, who is also one of the commissioned, and she's currently developing her play. But we did a one-day workshop, and she had this tiny little idea for two characters who would walk on stage and say shit to the audience. That would be about Hawaii. And then she dropped that idea. And I said, but that's a really interesting idea, because you're talking about historical characters, but these two will anchor us in the present moment. Are you interested in them saying more? He said, oh, I have lots for them to say. And then running with that, and then watching her play change. So really my job ultimately is to say, there's this thing happening. Is this interesting to you? Do you want to follow it? And so watching Lee, for example, really go for that. And then, or somebody like Ken, we're talking about exclusion, Ken having a real sense that there's something I want to write about. It's very close and very, very personal, but it also has to be a comedy, but it's also about the Chinese Exclusion Act, but it's also about a massacre, a brutal, racist lynching. And I want to do all of these things. And then finding himself at the end of the first, what was then the first act, going, this is not true. And that's a very dangerous question to ask. This is not true. It doesn't mean historically accurate. He actually meant this does not have truth behind it. I'm taking a shortcut, or I'm making it easy, or I'm making it forgiving of an audience. And then yet I cannot, as a playwright, get angry about this, because then it becomes something else. And then sitting with that for 6 months, and then going right back up and putting up all the floorboards, knocking down the house, and then rebuilding it. And so that is an act of courage to go, like, there's something here that I'm not getting. And so my job is to say, yeah, let's go for it, and to be supportive of that. Because ultimately, I don't know where it's going to go, but I know it's going to be interesting. And so my job is to really keep pointing to things and asking questions about whatever's happening in the play, and then really become, on one level, a sounding board, but also on another level to become a pain in their arse. Do you know what I mean? That I'm going like, there's this, and there's that, and what about this? And then they can choose to respond to that any way they like.
Well, it's interesting because you've had a life both as a critic and as a dramaturg and as a director and as a writer. What would you, as a critic, say about Power Play Second?
If I were a critic, I would embrace the ambition of it. I would embrace the originality of it. I would embrace the diversity of the writers. I would embrace the diversity of the approaches to it. Individually, I would be supportive of all of the individual plays. But I also think the plays raise, I mean, this is one of your secret questions, which is about theater critics. And so I used to be a theater critic. I was a theater critic for a national newspaper in Ireland for 10 years. I was infamous for writing criticism about critics and the failure and their continuing failure and the same failures that exist in America, which is that fundamentally critics don't have a philosophy of theater. In other words, they don't understand their own role as advocates for an art form or advocates for a field, which is not to say that you can't say, this doesn't work because of this, but they have to be in a larger conversation with the society and culture around them, and they also have to have a cultural competence, this is what I'm getting to, which is that many American critics are older white men who look like me. Do you know what I mean? And that is a failure in terms of cultural competencies. And so their experience on how they're writing about these history plays is problematical because it comes from a very particular viewpoint. And so it really what this project exposes is how inadequate theater criticism is to engaging with this. So you take something like Nathan Allen Davis's play and how you begin to even respond to that as a white critic is so complicated by so many things. And reading some of the reviews, there was a complete failure of response, an adequacy of response. And so that it's really the diversity and complexity of the thoughts are not being engaged with by theater critics. So I would actually, if I were a critic again, I would be going, we need to hire critics, first of all. And we need to start really engaging with this. And this is one example of that we should be engaging with. And so, I trained at the O'Neill. Do you know the O'Neill Theatre Center?
Yes.
In Connecticut? It's famous for plays. But the other thing it's famous for is the Critics Institute. And so I went and I studied there for a month. It was great. It was hot. And all they said was like, your writing is really bad. And then by the third week of the 4 weeks, your thinking would become clearer. And so they asked me in my first year, they said, would you like to come back? And I said, yes, I'd love to come back. In the third week, when everyone's head is fried and they're at their most vulnerable. Because the thing that I'm most interested in are the ethical and philosophical questions of being a critic. So that if you are being an advocate for an art form, how do you situate yourself in the culture and the society? How do you travel and look at work that is outside of your own competencies? How do you begin to speak about that? So a lot of the reviews that you read are thumbs up or thumbs down. But the other thing that they do, which drives me crazy, is a narrative of the entire play. So who cares? So when I was a critic, I would write the narrative of a play in 3 lines. And so the rest of the time, the other paralysis that critics experience is they're blind. So they can't actually describe what they see on the stage. So they fail to describe what's actually happening on the stage. And so the powers of description are terrible. And then the powers of analysis are really weak. So that's why when a really good critic can rise above the general morass. But the really fundamental truth about critics, and it was Shaw who said this, is that you should only be a critic for 3 years and then you go mad. Or you do something else. I was a critic for 10 years, but I started doing something else after 3. And the reason why, and Peter Brook spoke about this as well, which is that fundamentally, it's not that you're seeing bad work that drives you mad, it's the mediocre work that drives you mad. Because bad plays teach you something about theater. Bad productions teach you something about theater. Excellent productions are those that transform you and may give you the impulse to continue, both as an audience member, as a critic, as an artist, to find the next. But it's the mediocre stuff that actually drains the lifeblood. So what happens to critics is they become bitter and twisted, and angry and resentful, and then they start taking it out of the work.
Yes.
And the reason, and the reason they take it out in the work is they have no philosophy to fall back on. So here's a question I ask my students: how many of you think theater is important? No, not all. How many of you think theater is necessary as water is to a fish, as air is to breathing? Well, that's better. But not everyone. And that's completely fine. But that's the beginning of your philosophy of theater. When you begin to question why, and particularly if you're an artist, why is it I'm getting out of bed in the morning if I don't think it's important or if I don't think it's necessary? So I would ask this with Anne Bogart, who I do quite a bit of work with. I would ask her directing students. These directing students are paying $60,000 a year. I asked this question, and only 3 of them put up their hand for necessary out of a class of 15. I've asked the same question at the Kennedy Center for these students who were dramaturgs, who were MFAs as dramaturgs. I asked this question. There were 9 of them, and only 1 of them put up their hands for necessary. And 3 of them put up their hands for important.
So that means that our audience understands that it's necessary. Our practitioners do not.
I don't even think
But that's a little scary, Jocelyn.
But what I'm saying is that if you're on the inside and as a theater maker, you kind of need to know where you're getting out of bed in the morning. But if you're a theater critic and you can't answer either of those questions, then that's the beginning of philosophy. I think audiences have a really strong sense of why it's important. But generally also they have an experience where if I'm not being transformed, then I don't know if it's necessary. It could be important. So therefore we as theater makers have to make sure that the theater that we're making is excellent.
How with the critics?
Well, yes and no. I mean, really good critics are valuable because what you actually want is a sense of perspective. And so the critics that I'm talking about, the really good ones provide you with a sense of perspective, but most of them don't. So it's only locked in this moment. But you have to have a sense of tradition, you have to have a sense of innovation, you have to have a sense of culture and society, blah, 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 blah. But they're like the really big questions. So one of the things that's most interesting to me is that in Sanskrit, a work of art has to do 3 things. One is to entertain the drunk, to ask, what is it to be human, and how does the universe work? And so fundamentally, as a theater maker, if a work of art that I'm engaged with isn't really engaging with those 3 questions, then I don't know what I'm doing it for. But fundamentally, the audience has to have that sense of like, oh, I'm having a great time. But is it also asking me, am I seeing this bigger question for myself about what is it to be human, or how does the universe work? And then if it's only doing the one thing, then somehow the audience is being shortchanged. And the degree to which the audience then goes, hold on a second, we're being shortchanged.
So, Jocelyn, I know you have a couple burning questions for me, so go ahead.
So my question is, what's the most important piece of advice you would give to a new artistic director? Not necessarily of here, but like the one piece of information that is illuminating.
If you don't understand and know why you are in a place and why you are centered in this new place, you will fail. So behind that statement is really knowing the history. If you don't know the history of the place, if you don't fall in love with the history of the place, then you aren't able to continue or break away from what is already there. Because the idea that you come into a theater and you build on whatever that theater is one of the most important things you can do as an artistic director. So that means that you have to be a great listener, That means you have to be great about questioning. That means you have to be fearless in hearing the answers that you may not want to hear. And have the courage to continue on. And have the courage to take those ideas and allow them to become large. And as a leader, it's all about making sure that you're not just the one in front with the flag, but if you turn around and you see nobody's following you, you know the communication hasn't been very good.
And then, what's the worst piece of advice?
The worst piece of advice I've ever received about anything? I think the worst piece of advice I've ever received is when someone said to me, you should just stay still. You know, don't move, don't make changes, don't move forward. Just stay doing exactly what's been done before. Because ultimately, that's a fool's journey. Nobody can ever do that in the first place. And I think that was, I can't remember when I received that advice, but I really did think, okay, that's not the brightest bulb in the package.
And really, I suppose the question that I'm most intrigued by is, what are you most looking forward to doing next? It doesn't have to be in theater, but just like, generally, what would you like to do next?
You know, Jocelyn, it's really anything that I want to do. Because for 50 years, my life has been programmed. You know, I've got this at 8, I've got this at 9, I've got this at 10, I've got this at 10 at 9, I've got... And my mind, it doesn't matter if I'm on vacation or doing anything else, a big piece of it has always been the theater. And whether that was Perseverance Theater or now Arena Stage, that was always in the back of my brain. And so I'm really looking forward to this moment where all of the ground, and it's really fertile ground, right? I mean, you look at this incredible theater, this incredible company that's here. And as I move away from it, my own ground, I want to see what comes up. I will always be an artist. I will always think like an artist, whether I'm doing theater, whether I'm doing film, whether I'm doing pottery. But what is going to come up for me as an artist? Because I've made this choice at a time in my life when I am vital, when I've got a ton of energy, when I've got a lot of ideas, to actually turn the page and to see what's next. And to be fearless about that, as opposed to afraid. I mean, I never want...
I'm not knowing.
And not knowing, and being happy about not knowing, right? I kind of love that because I like going into a city and getting lost. My partner Suzanne does not. She likes going to a city with a map. And I'm like, why? Let's just go get lost. And she's like, please don't do this to me again. But that's one of my favorite things to do. So I like to get lost in my life as well. And then see which direction to go. Because you're always going to go your own true north, right? That's the beauty of it. Okay, we've got 10 minutes. We're going to turn out to the audience. Any question you want to ask Jocelyn or me, this is your shot. And then afterwards, we're going to go up, and there's a bar upstairs, and you can get drinks and continue talking to Jocelyn, to continue talking to each other. So does somebody have any question? Yes?
On the SAG question, it seems that you're talking about capitalism, how it interacts with true life.
He's interested in the SAG question, how capitalism interacts with everyday life.
Yeah, I don't know a lot about SAG, but the thing, because we were talking about this earlier on, I worked on a play that I wrote for Anne Bogart and the City Company many years ago called Reunion, which is about the group theater. And Reunion nearly broke the City Company because one of the things that it did was it talked about the difficulty of making art and being an actor as you get older and your priorities change. and about family, and about permanency, and about having a sustainable life, because it's hard being an actor, but it's also not only physically demanding, it's emotionally demanding, but also it's incredibly unconducive to family life and to relationships. And so the SAG part of it is, again, it is about parity, it is about equity, it is about actually making a sustainable life, and yet it's inside this capitalistic model. So the question is how to break that model. And so you look at, or not break, but sort of ideally break, but certainly change and subvert. And so that in Europe it's slightly better because there are better supports, whereas in America there are less better supports, if not none, no supports. And so really it's about figuring out how to do that, because it's hard. And let's be really frank, most people generally think that artists are frivolous human beings. And they think that actors are frivolous human beings. And they're not really working. And that they're playing. Whereas actually it's really hard. And it's challenging and demanding, but they're also carrying college debt. And so they're in the same general area as everybody else, but somehow we don't take them seriously as we should. And you will find that most countries don't have supports when they're not working, because they are the ultimate temp workers. If you get 3 productions a year, you are doing really well. But how much of money is that? That's not sustainable. And so it's really about really digging into that. So I think that SAG needs to, from an outsider's perspective, we have to start doing that as well. I think it needs to be a much more holistic approach.
There's a question here.
Thank you. The neighborhood that you're in is now going to receive what you created here, the artistic spark and the physical structure. And I just wondered what your relationship is to this physical structure, which you will presumably now walk away from. And also, are these your books, and are you taking any of the tchotchkes?
We have a wonderful donor that has given an anonymous fund to me every year as the artistic director, because his family loves the way in which I work in the theater. And so you're going to see another $5,000 or $6,000 in books that are going to go in here. I won't be taking these books with me. As a matter of fact, there are more books that are in my office that are going to end up here as well. So there's going to keep being a treasure trove here. And we want it to be that way because we want this to be about the study of American theater. My relationship to this theater is profound. It's in my blood. It's in my bloodlines. I will be on the sidelines cheering as Hannah Sharif comes in, and we'll be really curious to see how the organization changes, because organizations change. I'm really proud of our staff. There are a number of staff members here tonight and some artists that are here tonight. I'm intensely proud of this organization. We have board members here too. And I just know it's going to go through more phases and more interesting phases. And I hope that as Hannah comes in, there are going to be times when she will make mistakes, because all artistic directors do, because we're human, that there is that support underneath her as she goes through those kinds of changes that she will be making, taking on such a major institution as this is. I describe it as riding a tiger every day. And somebody said, what do you mean? Is a tiger biting you? And I said, well, sometimes the tiger's licking me. But oftentimes the tiger is running very, very fast. And sometimes kind of whipping me with its tail. So you have to get used to riding the tiger and actually at a certain point relishing the ride. You guys must have more questions. Do I see one right here? Yes, please.
Well, I don't necessarily have a question, it's more a comment. I'm a playwright, and as a human who has a love affair with words and spinning stories about the human experience, it's pretty scary to think that what's created by artificial intelligence could actually be considered
Art.
could be considered art and could take the place of real human beings who, you know, are gifted artists. And I mean, I don't even like going to the grocery store to self-checkout because that's taking the place of a human being.
Yeah.
So that's just really scary.
But if you listen to the two of you, what's great news for you, you talented person, is that you all are saying, this is absolutely impossible. You're saying both, unless you have the history, unless you have the passion, unless you think this is a total necessity, all of that, that it's not going to happen. Well, yeah, they're going to jabber a bunch of words. How could they incorporate what you both have said so eloquently and done with your lives? And the critics are hired, am I right, by newspapers. Do they go? Well, let me see. Did you go to Jocelyn's, thing? And do you have ethics? Hell no, it's not papers. This is, to me, maybe I don't know. Right?
Yeah, but I don't disagree with that. But the thing I would say is the question that you asked, which is, am I going to be replaced as a playwright? And the answer is no, you're not. And what I mean by that, and I don't mean that in a slightly condescending way, I actually mean it in a very real way, which is the thing about being a playwright is who are you writing for, ultimately? And what is your community, what is your grouping, what is your connection? And so that it always has to have a function and a bigger question underneath it. And so ChatGPT is just a generator of text. What people choose to do with it is a different thing. But you are also a creative artist who has stories to tell, and you have to find the people who will listen to those stories, or who want those stories, or who need those stories. And ChatGPT can't do that. And so it's really about ultimately, and this is the thing about fundamentally, what is a playwright for? And the playwright is for telling the story of a community. That's what they do. And they go out, and sometimes they leave the community and they come back to the community and say, this is what we saw in the world. Or this is the thing that I'm thinking about. Are you thinking about this? Or I have this idea, or I have this feeling, and I want to share this feeling with you, and I want to hold you inside this feeling. And so ChatGPT can't do any of those things. What you should really be doing is studying ChatGPT, see if they generate really interesting texts that you can then exploit. And I do really think that's the point, which is you take a record player, and what can you do with a record player? And then you look at all those amazing DJs did in the late 70s and early 80s, and it evolved an art form that was exquisite and did things that we never thought before. But those experiments with record players are what was happening in the 1950s in the Academy. So my point is, it's what you do with it. And so ChatGPT in and of itself is not a threat. It's how you choose to use it and how you choose to respond to it. And so I would be shameless in taking really good ChatGPT text and seeing what I can do with it in terms of my own work. And that's really the challenge posed by it. So it's not about replacement. It's about innovation and how can you respond to that and how can you use that. And that distinguishes the artist from the machine. And that distinguishes you from the AI.
I think that's a beautiful place to end, because this is the last Molly Salon, and yet what are we doing? We're talking about the future. So the future is right there in front of us, and let's go running toward it. So thank you all so much. It's been great to see you tonight.